Hello, welcome to this channel. Today I want to talk about Stellar again and provide some sort of a brief overview of this network. Because, Ethereum is much more in the news, but we don't talk that much about Stellar. So I think it's an interesting project and it deserves to be known a bit more. Stellar is actually a blockchain, so I'm going to present most of the core concept of it. What is called ledger in Stellar are actually each block. So it's going to be all the transactions that are being put in one single block. And those blocks actually are being created. So those ledger are being created every 2 to 5 seconds on the network. So it's very, very quick. The native token on Stellar is called the Stellar Lumens, the ticker XLM. And the smallest unit of Stellar Lumens is the stroops. So one stroop is a 1/10 or 10th million stellar lumens, which is extremely small. And we usually pay the fees on this network at about 100 of these stroops. So it's very, 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 very cheap. The consensus is very different from what you might know from Bitcoins or Ethereum. It's called the Federated Byzantine Agreement. And the principle is that you have some sort of quorums between different networks of nodes. And when all the networks are, agreeing on a given course of action, then they are added to the ledger. So as I said, the fees are about 100 stroops per transaction as of today. But those fees, and that's something interesting, are not supposed to pay any sort of miners because there is no mining per se. They are actually redistributed to the accounts holders. And that's a bit different. Also, there's some sort of inflation that is taking place on Stellar regarding the native token, which is Stellar Lumens. So this inflation is about 1% a year, and it is 1% a year. And this is done via releasing new tokens in the network. But I think that this inflation might disappear because what happens now is that some kind of pool redistribute that to everyone. Anyway, we'll speak about that later on. Operations are everything you can do on the network. Usually they are operations against given accounts. So, accounts are simply a set of private keys, but publicized as one public key on the network. And operations are everything that can change that. For example, changing the signatures, doing a payment from one account to the other. That's the kind of things operations are doing. Transactions are what will wrap those operations. One transaction can have different operations in it. For example, in one transaction, you can say, I'm going to send these tokens to this account, and I'm going to change these accounts' signatures, and something like that. All of this can be done via a given transactions. This is a core part of the Stellar network. And finally, we've got this concept of Stellar smart contracts. So a smart contract on Stellar is not exactly the same as what you would see on Ethereum, for example. There is no scripting language per se. The Stellar smart contracts per se are more a set of transactions that are pre-signed and can be, constrained in a certain way so that you've got some sort of logic branches. But we'll speak about that later on in another video, probably. Okay, the consensus of Stellar. So as I said, you've got different pools of validators on the network, and those validators are in a network of pools. So one validator can be in different pools. And when all the pools of all the validators agree on a given transaction set, then only it's going to be applied. So this is why there is no sort of mining whatsoever. There is no incentive to mine those nodes. It's a very different concept from Ethereum, because the only incentive would be that as a user of this network, you want it to be safe. You want to use it with the maximum confidence. And for that, you're happy to add your own node to the system. So a transaction lifecycle is fairly simple. You can actually create this transaction, which is for about any kind of form. It could be creating in a memory in JavaScript, for example. You can actually sign also these transaction using private key for a given account. So yeah, all transactions are related to a given account. So it's an account that creates transaction. So obviously you may most of the time have to sign this transaction with a given account's private key. So all of this can happen offline. There is nothing about the network here. And a transaction itself can even be saved as a file. When you've got that, you can actually submit this transaction. So it's going to be a simple request, HTTP request usually, via one of the nodes. This transaction will be propagated across the network, and then the validators will find some sort of consensus about this transaction. They will also validate the transaction, verifying that the signature is right, verifying that the balances are okay and all. And when it's done, it's going to be integrated to the next ledger. So that's how it works. Fairly simple, even compared to, for example, Bitcoins. So a given account has a private key, but nothing prevents to change that. For example, you can say that, oh, by the way, I want this account not to have one signature for a given action, a given transaction. I want it to have like 2 or 3 signature from those and those accounts. So this is something you can do exactly just like what you would have with Ethereum. Time bound. So another thing also is that you can say, oh, I want this transaction to happen only after a given time, for example, or till a given time. And this allows you to constrain a bit your transaction. So you've got the fact that maybe you don't want a given transaction to happen before a given time. You say, okay, I want to wait for 3 months before this transaction is valid, for example, with an escrow account. Then you can do that. Multi-currency. So the Stellar network is extremely suited for everything related to token generation. So I'm speaking about ERC20 style or ERC20-like tokens. So these tokens can be fairly easily created on Stellar. It's actually much, much more simple than using Ethereum for that, and extremely cheaper compared to Ethereum. Anchors are entities which by you create new tokens. So when there's a new token, it might have some 2 parameters. One is the ticker of it, so say ABC or something like that. And it's going to be also linked to a given account, which will be Stellar accounts. And so that's what we call an anchor. An anchor is that. But also it's the entity that is behind this account. That could be, I don't know, any company or any individual that is emitting those tokens for whatever reason. Trust lines. So trust lines are one of the parameters of a given account on Stellar. The trust lines are a way to say, oh, I'm accepting those tokens. For example, on Ethereum, you might receive some airdrops from different issuers of tokens. But on Stellar, you have to be active preemptively, and you have to say, oh, for this given account will accept this token that has been issued by this anchor. And only then you can actually have those tokens. So it's a good way to prevent receiving like weird tokens and all. But it's also, as the name says, is the fact that you, from now on, you trust that this anchor can actually create those tokens, and you accept the fact that you've got confidence in it. So it's quite interesting as a concept. So another thing with Stellar Network is that everything related to exchanges is already inside the protocol itself. You can, via transactions, create exchange transactions. You can say, oh, by the way, I'm selling this type of token for this amount of Stellar elements, for example. And you can publicize this. And there's a way for the network to match those orders and to perform those exchanges out of the box. You don't have to use any exchange per se. It's all part of the network itself. Very interesting indeed. Another concept is the concept of federations. So federation is a neat way to say, for example, if you have a given account that is called ABCD123, whatever, like these 50 digits and letters for a public key, it's not very human friendly. So you can actually associate your public key to a federation. Say the name of the federation is whatever. And you can say, I want my account to be named as John Smith at this company. So this is a way to say, okay, I've got a more human-friendly account name. At the same time, you've got other ways that federation can be used, but we won't speak about it today. So in terms of use cases, what you can do very easily on Stellar, as I said before, is issue tokens. This is one of the simplest use cases. And the fact that it's very constrained is also a very good security, I would say, and safety measure compared to Ethereum. You don't have much programmation to do for that. It's part of the protocol itself. It's native to it. And that's a big advantage, I think. One of the big advantages of Stellar, and why you might see more ICOs on Stellar than you would expect regarding its own use today. Also, you've got these trust lines. So trust lines, as I said before, are a way to say that for a given account, you deem the fact that, this company that is creating those bread tokens, I trust the fact that they are legit for that. And I'm saying, okay, fine, I trust that for my account. And exchanges. So a good thing with Stellar is this notion of DEX and the fact that you also have these kind of swaps between tokens that can be done easily. So for example, if you want to say, I want to exchange Stellar for British pounds, nothing prevents inside the network to create some sort of a chain of exchanges and to say, first I'm going to exchange my Stellar lumens for like cherries, and then cherries for bread, and bread for wrapped ether, and those wrapped ether for wrapped or pound peg tokens. So this is something you can do, and it's native inside it. You don't need any programmation or like very advanced smart contracts to do these kind of things. So I think it's a very, very good feature of it. When it comes to ICOs, same thing. As I said before, it's very easy to issue new tokens, whether you are an individual or a company. And as it's part of the core features of Stellar, I think it's a very, very good platform to do so. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this brief overview of Stellar. There are many, many things to say about it, and I will jump into it in the next videos.